started because
Thank you.
Just letting everybody know that just in case other people want to see it later, we're recording the meeting.
That's
I
great.
wanted to, Rabbi unfortunately will not be able to attend tonight. He has been called for another meeting earlier this evening. But I'd like to thank first and foremost Dr. Szycher for suggesting such an interesting topic and for volunteering his time to prepare tonight's lecture. For some of you who may not know Dr. Szycher, slide here, okay. Dr. Szycher was born and raised in Cuba. He left Cuba because of Castro, as many of our Temple Menorah members. After leaving Cuba, his family attended Temple Menorah for decades, which I did not know. Many of you knew his mother, Rachel Szycher, of blessed memory, his brother, Mariano Szycher, his sister, Margarita Kaufman, which I had the pleasure to meet, and of course, my dear Rebecquita de Laster. Dr. Mike worked with the team that developed the artificial heart in the Boston area and is now a full-fledged Floridian. Got tired of the snow, Dr. Szycher. Having retired to Florida with his wife, Lori, and is a regular Minyan attendee with Rabbis Carlson and Kunis. Welcome, Dr. Szycher.
Well, thank you very much, Nani. And if you can make me your co-host.
Of course, I will stop my share.
Okay, and I will do.
There you are. You are co-host now. We're ready when you are.
Okay. Okay, so here are the two questions that all the speakers ask. Is can you see the slide and can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so
we can see the slide.
Well, hello everyone. It's a pleasure to see you all, and good evening. And let's see if we can get into this presentation. We'll go through it, and then of course, towards the end we can have all of the Q&A that you would like. The first thing that I'm going to do is that I'm going to give you a quick timeline because a lot of the people that we're going to be talking about that will have a direct connection to the Constitution. Believe it or not, back in the 1600s in England, there was a philosopher by the name of John Milton. And John Milton, as you're going to see, had a great deal to say about what ended up in the American Constitution, even though he was in England and he never came to the United States. The other thing that in 1736, Yale University got established, and I'm going to be showing you seals from different universities, each and every single one of which has some Hebrew having to do with the Bible. So I'm going to show you that. Then, of course, one of the revolutionaries in my old hometown of Boston, Thomas Paine, he had a great deal to do with what ended up being in the Constitution of the United States, where we essentially said no more monarchy. We wanted to have constitutional government and wanted to have a republic. You're going to see all of the founding fathers from the American Congress, which was in the 1774 to 1789. And you're going to see that all of them not only spoke Hebrew, they actually read the Hebrew Bible in Hebrew. And as a result of that, they ended up incorporating a whole bunch of things from the Hebrew Bible into the Constitution, which is what we're going to talk about. And of course, the Declaration of Independence. So this gives you sort of like an overall view of what we're going to be discussing. Well, here is the seal of Yale University. And in Latin, you see lux et veritas. However, on the inside, you're going to see Urim V'Thummin, which means light and truth, lights and perfections, both either from Exodus 28:30 and Leviticus 8. So you see it right there. Urim V'Thummin. I don't know if you ever saw the seal, but the seal is still there, and those words and letters are still part of the seal of Yale University. Here is Dartmouth College. And if you can take a look at the top, where there is an inverted triangle, you're going to see the Hebrew words saying El Shaddai, God Almighty. And this, of course, goes back into the 1700s and early 1800s. Here's Columbia University. On the left-hand side, you're going to see the regular Columbia University, and you see the Tetragrammaton, what we would say Adonai. And then also from Columbia University on the College of Physicians and Surgeons, you're also going to see up on the tippy top the Tetragrammaton again in Hebrew. And I'm going to show you one last one. This is the Liberty Bell, which now resides in Philadelphia. And it says, proclaim liberty throughout the land. And I'm sure you know that this is from Leviticus 25:10, where we're talking about after 50 years, the special anniversary that we have. And it says, proclaim liberty throughout the land. This is so, okay. So it gives you an idea of how much of the Hebrew Bible is actually incorporated into American culture. Okay, so let's get started with John Milton. Now, John Milton, as I was saying to you before, was an English philosopher, and he was completely opposed to the monarchies. And you might say, gee, in England, there was a king, and he was so completely opposed that he wrote all kinds of books. He was accepted and invited to many universities. And the question is, why wasn't he killed? Because anybody who would have gone against the kings in Europe would have been killed right away. Well, the reason is that he had a very famous family, very rich family, highly influential. And as a result of that, he wasn't killed. However, what he said is, you should not have a monarchy. You should have some kind of a constitution where the people are going to be in charge, and you don't have a king, because the kings are going to have sons. Remember that at that time, only sons were allowed to become kings. Every once in a while, one of the daughters became a queen, but that was highly unusual. It was mostly from father to son to son to son. And he kept saying that when you have a situation like that, the son or sons may not be particularly good. And he was quoting the Bible. So let's take a look at that. According to him, it says, God in much displeasure gave king to the Israelites. So what he was saying is that if God did not want the Israelites to have a king, we in Western society should not have a king either. And he was quoting the Bible. So let's take a look at what he was saying in the Bible. Well, what he was saying was, Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life, and when he was old, he made his sons judges over Israel. Sons meaning the sons of Samuel. That's 1 Samuel 8:1. Then it continues. Israel rejected the sons, refused to obey Samuel, and demanded a king. You may remember that from 1 Samuel 8:19-20. But then it says, when Samuel reported their request to God, God said, listen to them and give them a king. That's 1 Samuel 8:22. So according to the philosopher, he said, God did not want the Israelites to have a God. But if they insist, give them a God. And if you remember our history, with the exception of a few good kings that we have, most of the other ones were absolutely for the birds. Well, so now we come to Thomas Paine. And what he was talking about here in the United States, in Boston, he was talking about monarchy and succession. So if you have a succession, if you have a monarchy, you're going to have a king to the sons, to the sons, to the sons, and the sons may or may not be any good. It hurts the country. And he kept saying Israel got hurt as a result of the fact that they insisted in having a king, even though God didn't want us to have a king. Therefore, here in the United States, we should not have a king either. We should not be a monarchy once we gain our independence. And he was highly influential. Well, let's take a look at John Adams and Jefferson, because what they did is they looked at Jewish, in here it says Jewish history and Jewish ideas. They actually looked in the Bible and also continued to look at the history of Israel. So we're going to be discussing three of them: Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson. Now, one thing that I want to emphasize, they were all what today we would consider them to be biblical scholars. They knew Hebrew, they knew the Bible, and they kept quoting the Bible. And the reason why they wanted to learn or read the Bible in the original language, Hebrew, is because they didn't trust the English translation. So they wanted to go directly to the Bible and understand.
Rightfully so.
Rightfully so. That is correct. So Ahuva, you could have easily have been their teachers.
No.
Okay. So what I have in here, and this is my busiest slide, by the way, I'm going to give you 5 biblical laws that ended up being in the Constitution. So the first one is the principle of equality. We are equal in the United States as a result of the Constitution. So where did we get that? Well, the Hebrew Bible says that God created Adam as the father of all peoples. Therefore, all humans are born equal and should be treated equally by the law. And this today is recognized as a major principle of American law, equality of everybody. And the equality comes from God, not from the government. Freedom of speech. Well, in our Bible, it says that many prophets openly criticized our bad kings. And those prophets were not killed. They were not sent out of Israel. The kings had to listen to them. Maybe they did what the prophets said, maybe they didn't, but the prophets were not hurt or punished as a result of what they said. This is now what we have here as freedom of speech. Freedom of religion. Well, there were many disputes that we had, many sages, many rabbis about the interpretation of both the Bible and the Torah. However, you can have whatever your opinion is of the Torah and of the Bible, but no one was ever tried in Judaism. Nobody was ever tried for heresy. That is to say, and heresy, as you know, is going against religion doctrine. So the founding fathers said, well, that means that we here in the United States should have freedom of religion. And that's where they got it. Okay, fair trial. We're all entitled to a fair trial, whether you're rich, whether you're poor, whether you are white, whether you're black, it doesn't make any difference. You're entitled to a fair trial. So where did we get that in the American Constitution? Well, you may remember that in the Great Sanhedrin, you were entitled to be brought to the Sanhedrin and be represented. Now, there were other lesser courts because, the Sanhedrin was sort of like the Supreme Court. Well, lesser courts had 23 judges. and they were looking at all sorts of civil as well as criminal law. The accused not only could defend himself or herself, but they could have somebody else plead for them. And there had to be evidence and testimony of witnesses. That is what we now call fair trial. This is where we got it. And then punishment. Well, in the American system, what we say essentially is that the punishment should fit the crime. Well, they got this, and this came directly from Genesis 9:6. When we're talking about the commandment against killing, whoever sheddeth men's blood by men, shall his blood be shed. That is to say, whatever the punishment is, you need, whatever the crime is, you need to get a punishment that is commensurate with what you did. And you remember that, we say an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Well, in actuality, if you want to say it a little bit differently in better American English, you would say no more than an eye for an eye and no more than a tooth for a tooth is the principle of proportionality in punishment. That came from the Bible. Let's take a look at Benjamin Franklin. Here is the seal of Benjamin Franklin. Now, as it turns out, the United States did not accept Franklin's seal, but take a look at it. First of all, it says rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. And what you can see in here is on the right-hand side, you see Pharaoh. You see the phalanges of Pharaoh with their chariots and the horses going into the Sea of Reeds, the Red Sea, the Sea of Reeds, where they were all drowned. Then on the left-hand side, you see a figure. In this particular case here, it represents Moses and the Israelites that went on the other side. The symbolism here is that Europe represented the old Egypt. The Red Sea or the Sea of Reeds represents the Atlantic Ocean. And Moses in the promised land, it is now the United States. We are the new promised land. Well, let's take a look at Jefferson, third president. He, more than anybody else, was the principal author of what is written in the Declaration of Independence. Let's take a look at what Jefferson had to say. First of all, take a look at Jefferson's seal. Now, we didn't end up getting Jefferson's seal, but he called it the start of a journey. That is to say, the Exodus. He was saying the United States is embarking on a new journey, which is equivalent to what the Israelites did as a result of getting out of Egypt. And if you take a look at it, you can see that there are people that are going from Egypt to the promised land. Well, Egypt represents Europe. The new promised land is the United States. That was the seal that Jefferson wanted to have for the United States. Okay, so in his second inaugural, he quotes, actually, he says, I shall need the favor of that being. And then, which of course is talking about God. And he says on the second line, he says, as Israel of old. So he was saying that the United States is the new Israel. And it is based on the Hebrew Bible. John Adams. Well, let's take a look at something here. If we read the US Constitution, in Article 1, Section 2, it says, no person shall be a representative. So we're talking about now somebody who is going to run to be in the House of Representatives. You cannot be a representative unless you are at the age of 25 years and you have been serving at least 7 years as a citizen of the United States. So if you are either at the age of 25 or older, and you have been, let me get rid of this thing, this is mine. and you have been a citizen of the United States for 7 years, you are eligible to run for the House of Representatives. Let's take a look at the next one. This is Article 1, Section 3. Now, this is now the qualification for somebody in the Senate. The age now should be 35 years. You need to be a US citizen for at least 9 years. And you need to be in the residency of whatever state you're going to represent. So we see the qualification for somebody who's going to be in the House of Representatives and somebody who's going to be running for the Senate. Let's talk about what is required as a president. For that, they looked at Deuteronomy 17:15. God said to the Israelites, once they decided that they needed a king, and God said, well, if they need a king, let them have a king.
Wonderful, man.
But God said the following: be sure to appoint over you a king that your God chooses. He must be from among your fellow Israelites. Do not put a foreigner over you who is not an Israelite. So the framers of the Constitution took Deuteronomy 7:15 saying, do not appoint anybody who is not born among the Israelites. And let's take a look at what they said for the president. So here is Article 2 of the Constitution. It says, no person except someone who is a naturally born citizen shall be eligible to be president. So you can be a representative, you can be elected to the House of Representatives, you can be elected to be a senator, even though you weren't born in the United States. But if you're going to be the president, you must be born in the United States. And where do we get that? From the Bible. And the other thing that they said is we need to be a republic. A republic is a place where the citizens decide that they are going to be governed, they're going to govern themselves through their elected representatives. That's what a republic is. And here is the front of a very famous book by somebody who's a very astute political commentator, Eric Nelson, called the Hebrew Republic. Okay, so we have come to the summary. So I'm going to go through the summary, and then of course, Danny, you can take it back, and we can open it for Q&A. Okay, so let's take a look at the 3 bullets that I've got. In the US, according to the US Constitution, our rights are given by the Creator, not by the state. In other places, the rights are given by the kings, the governors, and the government, emperors. Our rights are given by God from the Hebrew Bible. We have equality because God made us in his image and everybody is the same. In other places, the kings interpret arbitrarily whatever the law is going to be, not equality. And then lastly, we are a republic. We're not a democracy. We have, so the president of the United States is not elected by the highest number of people that vote for him or her. It is based on the representatives of each one of the states, so that the small states as well as the large states are represented in forming a president. So we are a republic, we're not a democracy, whereas everybody else was essentially a monarchy. So that's the presentation, and I would now love to be able to hear from all of you. So let me stop share. And Danny, I'll give it back to you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Szycher, for a very informative lecture. I'd like to ask that everyone who's here to unmute themselves and ask any questions or start the discussion you may have had.
It was fascinating. Absolutely.
Very interesting.
Thank
I
you very much.
Go ahead, Ahuba.
wanted to add regarding the Urim and Thummim, originally what they were like part of the rhinestones that the Kohen Gadol used to wear on his breast, and supposedly they would light up, and when people would come and question or in judgment, he will receive through the Urim and Thummim, through these little stones or whatever that were on his breast, the answer. And it's, in the Bible, originally it was really translated, as high authority or specialized person. And that represented the idea of the Kohen Gadol, that he was the high authority to, to make judgment on certain things. Later on, it applied also to the laws and the social laws, that it went, and it also was given, that title was given also to the prophets later on, in the Bible. So that is, one of the things. And actually, Maimonides wrote a book that is called Urim and Thummim. And that book, has to do with also with law and order and whatever. So just a little point to add on.
Hi.
Anybody else? Go ahead,
Yes,
Rosita.
I like to ask the questions. I was reading what it says. For example, these ladies, Ilan, these ladies that are in Congress, how can they be there unless they have been living here for a long time? Because you said that in order to be in Congress or representative, you need to be here 9 years or 7 years, and you need to
9
be.
years are senators and 7 years are Congress people.
Right, but how come they would be elected? They were living all this time?
Well,
Here, this, I'm sorry, this ladies, Ilan and I know
They've been here for a very long time. They grew up here.
okay, well, I
no,
can,
South Africa, from Africa.
all right, I can tell you that Ocasio-Cortez was actually born in New York.
Okay, that. What about the other two?
Okay, the one of them actually, I think is from either Iran or Iraq or one of those. However, if you become an American citizen and
Okay.
you have lived in here for a minimum of 7 years as a citizen, you are entitled to run for the Senate. However, if you're not born in the United States, you cannot be president.
But wasn't this lady from Africa? One is a
She's-
Palestinian.
Well,
One
From Somalia.
okay, well,
Somalia, yeah.
okay, it really doesn't matter where you're from. It makes no difference.
Okay,
If you become an American citizen, so
I got it.
come from Russia, Japan, China, it doesn't make any difference.
Okay,
If you are born someplace else, but you become an American citizen,
I got it.
after a certain period of time, you're eligible for either the House of Representatives or the Senate, not as a president.
I got it. Thank you.
I have a question.
Hold on a second. Fred had his Sergio. Hold on a moment. Representative Ilam, just so you know, has been in the U.S. since 1995. So, Fred, you had your hand up first, and then
Yes.
Sergio.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Michael. That was very, very interesting presentation.
Yeah. Yes.
I wondered if you could elaborate or follow up on, I didn't fully follow how the fact that we're a republic comes from Judaism or from ancient Israel, when ancient Israel was in a monarchy. So I didn't follow that connection. Maybe you can elaborate on that.
Okay, excellent question. Well, what the fathers were saying, our forefathers were saying from the Constitution is the Israelites were a republic at one time. And then they rebelled and they said, we want a king like everybody else. And as a result of that, things started going down the tubes. That the only 3 good kings that we had were David, his son Solomon, and then later on Josiah. Okay, but the other ones were absolutely for the birds. So they said, let's learn from history and see what the Hebrews went through. They were much better off without a king. Therefore, we should also be without a king and have representation, which is a republic.
But was it a republic prior? I mean, I didn't know that prior to having the monarchy, it was a republic. I thought it was the prophets, which is not really a representative republic.
Yeah, you're right, Fred. It was basically based on all religion. Everything was a religious, how do I say it? It was, you know, all, it was no state. It was, everything was just religion, you know? So it was all the religious leaders. Everybody was connected with somehow with religion. And maybe that's why they decided to rebel and say, we want something different, you know, they needed something different.
Well, if I may change a little bit so that I can come back to Steve's question. Sure, I mean, you know, at some point in time, you know, not only did we have prophets, but remember we had judges.
We had judges, right?
We had judges, so somebody was representing us already. You know, it wasn't really the kind of representation that you and I think about right now. But, you know, remember, this is 2,800 years ago. But our judges, you know, which were, you know, special people of great character, and even though they were also religious, but they were representing us. So if you take that, that is the beginning, the seed of what we might consider to be a republic.
I got it.
I must add also that the judges were more on aerial. Like if you're talking about Samson, that he was in the south. If you're looking about Deborah, she was up in the north, you know? So there wasn't something maybe that united all of them in that.
It was decentralized, yeah.
They were not out of Jerusalem where the king would be.
Yes, and I think that what we ought to point out, Ahuva, is that, which you already said it, is that the judges came both from Israel as well as from Judah. And
Later on when it was divided, yeah.
And it was not from the center of power of Jerusalem, because that would not have been a representation.
Sergio, you had a question?
Yes, Dr. Michael. After the influence of the Jewish Bible and our way of life, etc., we write a constitution, and then all of a sudden, the why and the beginning of that constitution gets lost, and even the Jewish thinking somehow disappears out of the United States. How did that happen?
Okay, well, you know, since we have other lawyers in here, I'm going to give you a real quick explanation. Then I'm going to ask our other lawyers who are here with us, you know, to sort of chime in. If you may remember, you know, if we compare the United States with any other country, in here we say we follow the Judeo-Christian tradition.
Right.
So there's a lot of Jewish influence with us. It is not 100%, of course. I mean, you know, we're not a direct extension of Israel, but we don't call it the Judeo-Christian tradition for nothing. And now I'd like to ask the other attorneys to please chime in and see if we can get a much better answer than I gave.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, I think. Okay, that his question was is that, if there was a lot of Hebrew, if there was a lot of biblical influence in the Constitution, how come we have gotten so far away from it?
I got it.
It's the Establishment Clause.
At the Establishment Clause, exactly.
You can't have a state religion. So, I mean, even if there were vestiges or it was part of the makeup of it, there is no state religion. So I'm sure that, you know, over time, that's diluted the impact of it, and you can't really have official impact.
Yes, Steve, and I think that one of the things that I'd like to point out is that the separation of church and state, that did not come from the Bible. Because as a matter of fact, if you take a look at Israel, There's a tremendous religious influence on the Israeli government, but that was more that particular thing, separation of church and state, was completely separate from any influence of the Bible.
Can I say something?
Go ahead, Judge.
It's a yes and it's a no. It's a very complicated discussion with respect to Israel, because Israel is not just a religion, it's also, a people. But if you look at the original conception, where you had the Levites and the Kohanim taking care of the religious aspects of Judaism, while you had Joshua, and before that Moses, taking, especially Joshua, because Moses did more of everything, taking care of the political aspects of it. You could say, in a way, and there was some sort of separation of church and state, in the sense of some the religious duties belong to one group and the political duties belong to another group, and one did not have supremacy over the other.
Yeah, but after the passing of Moses, Joshua remains, and he
took over.
is basically everything. Yeah,
Right, took over.
basically took over, and he's basically everything. But you still had the Kohanim and the Leviim
Yeah,
signed already by Moses. Yeah.
as much as Joshua could do, he could not take the place of a Kohanim or anything like that. And I think that was a very subtle distinction between state and church. And I don't
That's
think
where things
it
started going
existed.
wrong also. That's where things started going wrong, because they lost the religion, a lot of it. And so they got into a lot of trouble.
Yeah, but further to the judge's point, which is a good point, you had the prophets as a separate power center from the kings, even at the time of the kings. So going to separation of powers, you could look towards that
Right.
in some ways.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very good point, separation of powers. That's a good term to use in this respect.
And
Absolutely.
to add to what you have just said, you may remember that most of the prophets got the kings very mad because they were going against the king, the monarchy. They kept saying, "You guys are doing it wrong. You guys are doing it wrong." Remember that?
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah.
But now we're getting
Just the Constitution, don't we have also like things that we read in the Bible about, like witnesses, and how many witnesses you need to have, and what kind of, like an eyewitness, like, isn't that also a part? I mean, I'm not a lawyer and I don't really, but I think that even that, like you have to have 3 witnesses in the Bible. Isn't that also influencing the judging system in the United States?
Okay, if I understand, if I remember correctly, and again, I'm going to ask the attorneys to chime in. I think that this came from British.
England.
This came directly from England. This was essentially.
Yes.
Okay, so it did not come directly from the Bible.
Oh, really? So where? So it came from
British
where?
law?
The
I
common
know
law
in Israel
came
it's
from
British
England.
law, but I didn't think that the Constitution here had any. I mean, that here they followed that.
Right. So so that I'm not the only one that is speaking, let me ask anybody else. Could somebody explain to the rest of the group what British common law is all about?
Oh, I don't know that.
Yeah, what we inherited was the legal system that was developed in England, and that came from the common law. But we made very, very big distinctions afterwards, so that you get an idea. The judges were really within the executive branch, if you could call it executive branch, in England, because they were appointed directly by the king.
Yeah.
Because it is the king who's supposed to hear the grievances of the people, just like with Moses, that he was hearing all the grievances, and then he had to appoint judges. There was no such separation between that sovereign and the judges. So little by little, they were becoming more autonomous from the king. And what made a difference when we adopted and continued to use that system in the United States is that we separated it completely from the executive branch.
Mm.
In Israel, they follow the British law. And in Israel, the judges are not voted in for their position. And there is, it's not the prime minister, although he must have some influence, but there is what we call a secretary of law, okay? I don't know if we have something like that here. And he's really the one to be responsible in, appointing or recommending the judges. And then it gets voted on.
So who appoints the judges in Israel?
So I'm telling you, there is a secretary, what we call a Sar Mishpatim, a secretary of.
Like a secretary of justice.
Secretary of Justice. Exactly.
And they're the ones that appoint the judges.
And they, yeah.
Okay, and Ahuva, I think,
recommend.
since you're so knowledgeable about Israel, again, for the rest of the group, so we're all together, could you explain a little tiny bit about the fact that in here we have a different system, but in Israel it's a parliamentary system?
It's everything is from the British, because after the mandate, the British mandate, we took over, everything remained the same in the whole system. So our kids go to law school, they can practice law in England easily. There's no problem for them to come practice law in the United States. They have to go through whole schooling. It's totally different. And vice versa, if our kids go to study law in England and they come to Israel and they're perfectly ready. So yeah, so that was basically adopted with the British mandate. Yeah.
I hope I'd like to ask, even though there's a tremendous amount of influence from British law into Israel, does Israel have any sort of influence from the Turkish Empire at all?
No.
Okay.
No.
It does in religious law, though.
Yeah. Well, religious law. Yeah.
Family law.
I see. And how does that work in family law?
We have different judges for the religious laws and different for civil laws. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So anything that has to do with religion, marriage, divorce, any disputes like that, family disputes, it goes through the religious courts. Yeah.
Depending on your religious affiliation.
Yes.
Interesting. Okay. Wow. Good.
Remember, in the British system, Parliament is supreme. You cannot hold Parliament to have done something unconstitutional, because whatever they do by definition is constitutional. That has changed in the recent years as they have developed as sort of like a Bill of Rights. But that is what was carried over into Israel when Israel became independent.
Exactly. But Israel does not have a constitution.
The same thing, exactly.
Yeah,
The United States does, but England and Israel
don't have a constitution.
But by case law, they have been developing a series of precedents that try to give those rights.
Exactly.
So what is the
Bill
job
of rights rather than a constitution?
So what is the job of the Queen of England then? If they follow the Parliament, what is her job then?
It's like the president in Israel. It's more like a
ceremonial.
Ceremonial, exactly.
Wow.
It's something for the British to spend money on.
Unbelievable.
Right? Fred is laughing. That's the truth. It costs them a fortune.
Yes, it does. The richest woman in the world. Sure.
Yeah. So.
And they love it.
They love it. But it's the same. We have in Israel, we have the president, who is also, they have some authority, like, to assign somebody to put together the government, like we have now, the situation with the elections, once the elections come out, the people of the Knesset come the elected people come to the president and suggest that such and such is going to try to put together a government, and they assign it to whoever it is that was suggested to do this at the time. And he's, it's mostly really representation for the country. Bring in guests, come in to visit, now there is a woman that is going to be running for president. She was a teacher by profession. Quite a few years ago, she lost 2 sons in the IDF.
Oh,
When she lost the first one, and then her husband got very sick and passed away with a heart attack. And then her second son also was killed. And she still has 3 children, I think, out of 3 children. She's a beautiful, beautiful lady. And she's just very, she's very warm, very welcoming, and she developed some kind of, I don't know, relationship with the people, and especially with the soldiers, and with children. And she's now one of the candidates to take over Rivlin's place.
wow.
Yeah.
And
The other one is a political figure. So
I have one quick question. In Israel, who nominates and elects the president?
that's a good question. I think probably there is, I don't remember anymore. I really don't remember. I don't think it goes by election. It goes, I think that's the Knesset.
Right. The Knesset.
I think it's the Knesset. I don't think, you know what? I don't remember. I've been away for so many years. I haven't been voting for so many years that I don't remember. I'm going to look into it. I'm going to let you know.
It's actually, or whoever was right, it's a simple majority by the Knesset.
By the Knesset, right? Yes,
Correct.
it's definitely not election. Yeah.
And one last question: for how many years does the Israel president presides?
7.
7.
And prime minister for life, as long as
7. Wow.
Danny, I don't want to put you on the spot. How come you know so much?
That's something called Google.
yeah, Danny's very smart.
Ah,
She knows how to Google real fast.
smart girl.
Ahuva is the one who's very knowledgeable about all things Israel. I know how to search for things.
Well, we're very impressed, Danny. That was very good.
Yeah.
Well, I want you to know that in preparation for this presentation, I consulted Rabbi Google many times.
Sure.
And I do too when I have to consult many things. I also do that.
Dr. Szycher, I actually had a question. I saw all of these Jewish sayings on the logos of Ivy League universities that you saw. Was there no anti-Semitism back then? Was that not an issue for them, being that a lot of those universities did not allow Jewish students?
Good question.
Well, that is a great question.
Great question.
I think that so I'm going to give you my take. One thing is for the founders of those universities to be knowledgeable in the Bible. However, they, for the most part, since they were Christians,
Right.
they were essentially anti-Semitic.
That's right.
And up until a relatively short period of time in the United States, there were quotas for how many Jewish students could be accepted into universities.
Yes.
And,
You're right.
and you may remember that one of the biggest anti-Semites in the world was Henry Ford.
Exactly.
May I
Right.
add something? Although they were, like you say, anti-Semites, the reason that there was all of this Jewish influence in everything they did is that they consider themselves the inheritors of that Jewish tradition. In other words, what they call the Old Testament and the New Testament, it's that new covenant, because they believe that once Jesus came,
Right.
the new people, of God, were those that believed in Jesus, and
Right.
therefore they are the true owners of the tradition of the Bible, and have by right, by having inherited the right to use those terminologies, the language and everything else. And that's part of what they call the Judeo-Christian civilization. So they could, at the same time that they were anti-Semites, they believed that they were the ones carrying the torch for everything that the Bible stood for, just like they believed that they were the inheritors of the ancient Greeks, even though racially and historically they were not, but they were defending those values of ancient Greece. And what you see in our Constitution is a mix of all those values they believed in with ancient Greece, and all those values that they carried through their religion.
And also, I'm going to say something. And they also were anti-Semitism because they believe that we Jews killed Jesus Christ. That's what I remember. I come from South America, Colombia, and I know that that's what they were taught. The Catholics were taught that.
Yes.
You Jews killed Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really?
The beginning was all the same for everyone. So it's the 5 books of what we call the 5 books of Moses. They call the 5 books of Moses. What we call Chamisha Chumshei Torah is all the same until we get to Joshua, and then things start changing. There are some extra figures come into the picture, into the history. Yeah.
But most of it is the same through the prophets.
So the prophets, yeah.
But the hatred against Jews were always, and I remember my,
Yeah, but that's
Catholic friends saying that we killed him, we killed Jesus. That's what they used to say. And that's what they were taught in their Catholic schools, okay?
Yeah, well, Rabbi Person gave us a class last week about it, and
Excellent.
He showed even what Martin Luther wrote about Jews. It was horrible.
Yeah. And we did it, and it was horrible, and that's what they hated. They hated us.
Okay.
Well, and those of us who actually took that class with Rabbi Perlson, if you remember, one of the things that he was showing is that all the things that for centuries the church was saying, and how the Nazis picked each and every single one of those.
Clicked on those, right?
Remember that?
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
That was a great class.
Yeah.
Fantastic class, yeah.
I'm sorry for those of us who weren't there. Would you repeat that, Dr. Szycher?
Yes. I think that this was the Wednesday presentation where he has the lunch and learn.
Right.
Yes.
And he was talking about was anti-Semitism as a general rule. And he
We were talking about the influence of the church on anti-Semitism.
Right.
Yes.
So one of the parts, because he did a fantastic job, and I believe that he said that he's going to continue with this.
It will be continued, yeah. So if anybody's
Tomorrow.
interested.
The
So-
church did horrible all over the South America and in the world. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so there was over the centuries, there was a whole series of rules and regulations against the Jews
Exactly.
that the Catholic Church instituted, as well as the Lutherans. Okay. So what the rabbi did is that he had a list on the left-hand side of all of those anti-Semitic rulings from the church and how the Nazis actually picked up on each
Picked
and
it up.
every one of those.
That was an incredible lecture.
That was a great lecture.
I missed it. Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, come on Wednesday, come tomorrow. It's to be continued, and he usually reviews what he did before, so you'll be able to be.
Actually, tomorrow's class has been canceled.
Oh.
Rabbi will have at a meeting he had to be called for, so we will resume the class next week.
Okay,
Oh.
thank you for letting us know
What
that.
What time is the class on Wednesday?
12 o'clock on Wednesdays.
It's a lunch and learn. It's called the lunch and learn. It's a 12 o'clock class.
Oh, okay.
Dr. Szycher, that was such an incredible lecture you just gave us.
Thank you very, very much. Thank
And
you very
putting
much,
together
Michael.
all that information, I was fascinated, and I studied this, but you put it, your focus, the way that you put everything together was brilliant, really.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I learned.
Thank you very much.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Like always. Thank you.
Thank you.
Toda rabah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Good night.
everybody, for coming, and thank you, Dr. Szycher, for putting this together. And we look forward to the next session you may provide for us.
Thank you, Danny, too.
Thank you.
Night.
Bye. Thank you, Danny.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.